or her airplane or helicopter, as this case may be. And so we feel that whatever air traffic control did or did not do was not a factor at all in the crash. Okay, and is there, the next question would be from Jane Wells.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. One is the NTSB and FAA seem to be at cross purposes at times. Is there anything suggesting, because such a beloved icon was on this flight, or there's a new administration or even a new transportation secretary, or anything that might give the NTSB more clout in getting these long recommendations enacted? And the second question is, there's now a bill to mandate HTOS for Part 135, but in this case, the crash investigator said it could have been more of a nuisance. So should it be a law? So a political question, do you have more clout? And secondly, do you support a law mandating HTOS? Thank you.
Well, we would certainly always push for our safety recommendations to be implemented, and we're hoping that regardless of who is in the administration, we are hoping that those safety recommendations would be implemented. As far as HTOS, we have been calling for HTOS for a long time. Whether or not that becomes a law, that's up to Congress. I will point out that as we said clearly in the board meeting, is that HTOS would not have prevented this accident. So we are going to stick with the facts and let the facts guide us. Any follow-up on that, Jane?
Only that in the case where it could actually be a nuisance, then it's almost, and others have suggested that HTOS could give VFR pilots a false sense of security if they get in trouble. So the drawbacks of it, I'm wondering if that has you rethinking that at all.
Yeah, I kind of missed some of that because of distractions on the screen here. But say that just one more time, Jane. Please.
Sorry, we live in a Zoom world. Yeah. I'm all happy to go back to conference calls at some point. But in any case, just the fact that in this particular case, HTOS could have been seen as a nuisance or a detriment, and others suggest it can be seen as a crutch potentially for VFR pilots who think, well, you know, if I get into trouble, I have my HTOS. Is there any sort of mitigation in your desire for making that legal?
No, we feel unequivocally that HTOS can save lives, and that's what we are pushing for. But again, I want to stress that it would not have made a difference in this crash at all.
Thank you.
Okay, you're quite welcome. Laura Diaz, hello.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for talking to us today. So you talked about the fact that the pilot made a series of decisions. And my question is, Mr. Chairman, how many junctures along the way do you think that the aircraft could have been landed safely?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that it could have been landed safely all the way up to the point where he entered the clouds. As said earlier, there was an airport about 12 miles behind him, an actual airport, but you can also land a helicopter in many confined spaces. So there were opportunities along the way to have reversed the course and prevented this crash by simply landing. And there was the former chairman or president of the Helicopter Association International, Matt Zuccaro, tragically died about 1 year ago today, almost to the date. And in 2014, he wrote an article saying, "Land the damn helicopter." And so that's certainly an option. And we wish that that option would be exercised appropriately.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Chairman Sumwalt, can I make a quick point real quick? For housekeeping, if you can please, if you're not asking a question, can you please turn your camera off? And also, once you've asked your question, if you can lower your hand, that will be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think I made that suggestion about the cameras earlier, but it doesn't seem to work. Sarah, would you be interested in turning your camera off at this time? Okay, so Elon, hello.
Hello. Thank you again for taking my question and having this availability. What I'd like to do is I'd like to explore this idea of self-induced pressure in the broader context of the helicopter industry's culture and expectations. So in the docket, there's an interview from an Island Express pilot who incidentally felt that he'd been punished for making one of those land and live decisions. And he had suggested that the accident pilot had actually flown through clouds in the past in very similar episodes. And so he had the quote, with respect to flying charters. So yeah, if that's what I have to do, well, then I don't want to do charters. I don't want to go fly an A-Star at 2 in the morning and have to descend through fog at 300 feet over the water or anywhere else. So where do you draw the line between self-induced pressure and these widespread expectations in the industry that may influence a pilot's decision-making?
Well, I think that the idea of you need redundancy in the system, and pilots, as I said, pilots are very can-do oriented. Pilots want to get the job done. It works for us, and it can work against us. And that's the advantage of having a very good and closely refined flight risk assessment, so that if the flight risk assessment values reach a certain level, then you have to go to someone else for their consultation as to whether or not you should even initiate the flight. So I'll just leave it at that. Any follow-up on that, Elon?
Yeah, just like, one follow-up. So another quote from the same pilot, I think the leaders should make an example, and flying with a minimum stats that low, it's sort of an indication to the other pilots that, hey, maybe they're expected to do that, or maybe they're not good enough, or maybe they would want to push themselves to do something like that. So, you found that there was no pressure from the company, but it seems like there might have been subtle pressure from the company in a way that extends throughout the entire helicopter industry.
Well, we did not, as you pointed out, we did not find pressure of that within the company. They canceled 150 flights the year before due to weather. They canceled flights, 13 cancellations that particular month, the month of January of last year. One on the day before the accident flight and one 2 days before the accident flight. Or those were when those cancellations were. 13 in January, all within 2 days of the accident flight. They did constantly stress in their safety meetings the need to just land the helicopter. So I think that, we do try to look at organizational issues and see if there were external factors that influenced somebody's decision. In this case, we found that the company, that there did not appear to be that external pressure. But again, as a pilot myself, I can tell you that the notion of self-induced pressure is definitely real. Warren Morningstar, hello.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Warren Morningstar from AOPA. And this is sort of a broader question about pressure on pilots, or how things go. I wonder, what is your thought on whether pilots sometimes avoid getting the help that they really could use from ATC for fear of getting a violation? It's just a little bit fuzzy. If I call and say I'm in trouble, then I'm going to get investigated, and I don't want to deal with that. Do you think that plays a role in the accident situation?
Well, it could. In general, we don't know exactly what this particular pilot's reluctance was, but we found in the past that pilots don't want to necessarily fess up that they're getting into problems, and we found reluctance of pilots overall, not this accident pilot, but overall we found a reluctance of pilots to declare an emergency. Certainly inadvertent encounter with IMC conditions is literally considered to be a life-threatening emergency. And so you make a good point. Pilots don't necessarily want to fess up their problems. So anyway, okay, we'll go to Pete. Pete from CNN.
Hi there. Quick question on how important is it now for the FAA to act on this, and do the FAA and NTSB see eye to eye on these recommendations, given the fact that in 2006 the NTSB recommended HTOS and the FAA felt that it was not necessary in helicopters of this type? Do you think the FAA sees these recommendations as now a mandate to act?
Well, I certainly think that's a question you'll have to ask the FAA. It's important to point out that we don't come up with recommendations just for the fun of it. We come up with recommendations based on problems that we have seen in accidents and crashes, and we issue recommendations accordingly. And we feel that if certain recommendations had been implemented, the likelihood of a crash goes down. And so, again, I would refer your question to the FAA. We will continue to push. You did mention HTOS. Again, I want to make the point, HTOS would not have prevented this crash. But the other recommendations we've called for, they continue to drag their feet, and we are pushing like crazy, and will continue to push like crazy to get those recommendations implemented.
Just a tiny follow-up. How aggravating or how upsetting is it to you that this pilot continued to fly at 140 knots, did not slow down, did not take any of the outs, airports on the way, parking lots, etc.? How does that make you feel now, having heard all that today over 4 hours?
Well, I think it's important to point out that that this pilot did make mistakes, but that does not mean that he was necessarily trying to be malicious. I certainly don't think he was out trying to kill himself and kill his passengers. But apparently it was an issue of judgment and decision making that led to this tragic situation. Tom Costello, you're next.
Hey guys, sorry about that. Had to find my mute button and my camera button for that matter. Mr. Chairman, you've made the point about HTOS and how it would not have made a difference in this case, but that really is at the core of this legislation being proposed by Senator Feinstein and also Representative Shaw. Is that an appropriate? I'm just wondering if your thoughts are that that would be an appropriate name for the legislation on HTOS, or whether it maybe should be modified to be more precise in how it could be useful.
Well, how legislation gets drafted and how it ends up certainly is in the hands of Congress, and we will leave it to the policymakers to decide what to do on that. I will reiterate that HTOS would not have in any way have prevented this crash. Is there a follow-up for that one, Tom?
No, sir. Thank you. I think most of my questions were asked already, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, sir. David Meyer, New York Post. Good afternoon. Let's see if I can unmute you somehow. Yeah, I can hear you. I hear you now. Yes.
All right. Good afternoon. Thanks for taking my question. This was asked earlier. I just wanted to ask it again because I don't think there was an answer. There was a mention of Island Express's inadequate review and oversight of its safety management process. Can you explain what that meant and why, at the same time, the investigators concluded that there was nothing uniquely unsafe or problematic about the operator?
Yeah, I caught the first part of that, and I'll ask for the second part in just a moment. We did, and thank you for the question. We, and see, now I've already forgotten the first part. Yeah, what did we find deficiencies with say that again, I'm sorry.
There were, you cited, the NTSB cited inadequate review and oversight of Island Express's safety management process. But the second half of my question was that at the same time, there was no indication that the company was uniquely unsafe or a problem operator. So what were the issues with the processes, and why did they not lead to a conclusion that there were issues with the company as well?
We did find that Island Express helicopters lacked a documented policy and safety assurance evaluations to ensure that the pilots were consistently and correctly completing the flight risk analysis forms, and that impeded the effectiveness of the flight risk tool altogether. This flight risk tool that they had, as you heard Member Hamady point out, that even when she did the flight risk assessment herself and threw in things that, kind of gave them the benefit of the doubt and said, well, I'm going to throw in the clouds or this instead of that, she came up with about a 38. On the Island Express flight risk assessment, to get to the next level of get it out of a normal category into a higher risk, you would have had to have gotten to a 45. So we felt that the flight risk assessment itself was not robust enough to prevent greater oversight. We found that there were audits done of the company, and there were certain things that they did not do. Let me see if I can find a couple of those. I had it all written down here, and no telling where it is right now. There were things that, like the company in an audit by Chevron conducted in October of 2019, they found that the safety manager had been in a role for about 2 years, but had never received formal safety training. So we felt that there was more that Island Express as a company could have done to provide oversight of their operations. And there was probably, I think there was a second part of your question too.
At the same time, I believe I heard that your investigator said that there was no indication the company was uniquely unsafe or a problem operator. I'm just wondering how you square that.
Well, it is hard to square, because as you heard me ask, well, they're the company that had the crash, and you have a company that really we did not find significant glaring issues with the organization. They had canceled a number of flights due to weather, and that's what we want companies to do. They did voluntarily implement an SMS program, but we did not feel that it was robust enough. So, as Bill English said, quoting him loosely here, but bad things can happen to good organizations. And by the same token, the pilot himself, we felt that the pilot, there were many very good glowing comments about the pilot, and I know from experience, having been on this board for almost 15 years, that good people can end up in bad situations. Okay, Stephen Gregory.
Thank you, Chairman Sumwalt. I wanted to go back. Some of my colleagues have already touched on this, but I do have a couple questions. The HTOS, one of the reasons that I wanted to ask about that was because Member Hamady on the scene last year had brought HTOS up, pretty much implying that that was a factor. And I know everything was preliminary at that point, but she really went into detail about the legislation, about the past accidents and things of that nature. Why do you suppose she felt the need, and I don't know if that's been communicated, why did she feel the need to go there? Why did she feel the need to express that and talk about HTOS in such great detail on the crash site that day? And I do have a follow-up.
Yeah, well, having done many press conferences on the scene, I watched her press conference, and she was clear in saying that we were not saying whether or not it would have prevented the accident. So the rest of that, I can leave that up to you to see if you want to bird dog that more with her. But she fully understands at this point that it would not have made a difference. But she was asked about HTOS. She replied that we have been calling for HTOS for a number of years. But then she, as I recall, the last thing she said is, we're not saying that it would have made a difference in this crash. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, it is. I just was curious why she she really went on for a bit about it, and I didn't know whether she was using that platform at that very moment or if there had been a deeper connection. But I don't want to bird dog that anymore. I just wanted to get your thought on that. Also, you have made these statements all throughout, not only the hearing, but with my colleagues here about good pilots make bad decisions. You talked about Island Express being a potential unsafe operator. After all, they were the ones that this crash happened with. Also, you talked about the previous owners of the helicopter had CFR, but Island Express did not. It was almost sort of this subtle hint along the way that you were sending out messages to either Part 135 operators or to Island Express that there was a series of bad choices along the way. Is that correct?
I think so. As you pointed out, they had a flight data recorder when they received the helicopter. They removed the I'm sorry, it was a CVR. Maybe it was an FDR. I'll have to look. Which was it? It was a cockpit voice recorder. They removed it when they got the helicopter. I personally believe that you can certainly operate a helicopter like this single pilot, and you can do it very safely until something happens, like you inadvertently flying to the clouds, or till your pilot gets distracted and something happens. So I feel like, as mentioned in the board meeting, the oil and gas industry has pretty much exclusively gone to two pilot operations in aircraft of this similar size. Why are they doing that? To enhance the safety margin. And I feel like that's a question that I have. This same exact helicopter, same exact ship, when Chevron used it, they had to have two pilots. Wondering why Island Express did not elect to operate that way when they were chartering to other clients. There's a lot
and finally,
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, sir. Please finish your thoughts, sir. I'm sorry.
There are a lot of corporate operators that I've checked with over the last few weeks that operate this same type of aircraft exclusively with two pilots. Again, the previous owner of this helicopter always operated with two pilots. I want to make darn sure that somebody doesn't think that I'm blaming the client for electing not to operate with two pilots. I think that sometimes I want the consumers to be aware. And just because something is legal doesn't mean that it's always safe. So go ahead with your follow-up.
Yeah, and my follow-up is just simply, how much of the airship were you able to reconstruct in Arizona?
I don't have the exact answer on that. The docket has the information about the condition of the parts that were recovered from it. So I don't know exactly how much of it we were able to reconstruct.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Dave Shepperson, hello.
Oh, hey, Chairman. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Hey, two quick questions for you. And you've sort of touched on them a little bit, but maybe you might want to talk about the broader issues. One, do you think there's any sort of training necessary that pilots aren't getting to sort of avoid these types of meteorological conditions, or making the decision making to whether to fly or not? And maybe again, more broadly, how do you think pilots address that concern that a couple of the board members raised about, you have high profile people who want to get places, they feel that pressure, on their own just to complete a flight? Is there anything you think the industry or FAA or you guys can do to try to reinforce sort of those basic lessons that pilots should follow?
Yeah, for training, Dave, we did one of the recommendations, as you know, that we issued to the FAA was to require the appropriate use of simulation devices during training, both initial and recurrent training for Part 135 operations. We feel that scenario-based training is important, where you can simulate, where you can better simulate how a pilot will react under certain conditions. We can teach decision making. We can actually train better aeronautical decision making. So yes, we think that can be improved, and so that's one thing that we have recommended. And Dave, I'm not sure about the rest of your question. Again, go ahead.
Yeah. Just in terms of high pro, one of your colleagues mentioned, a lot of high profile crashes involving, high profile people over the years. How do pilots or the industry sort of reinforce the idea of not feeling this self pressure to complete a flight, if you've got somebody important in the back?
Well, and I think it's not just related to people that are important or high net worth individuals. Everybody is important in my book, and you can have we see this in the air ambulance business, that there is that self-induced pressure for the pilots to complete the flight. You've got a sick patient, and you want to get that patient to where he or she needs to be. So that's why we need, it's important to have various layers in the system to cross-check and say, is this a good decision? That's why the flight risk assessment is good, if it's properly structured, so that you can, if it reaches a certain level, the pilot can't make that decision. It has to go to a higher level review to see whether or not they should launch.
Good.
Anything else on that, Dave?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. Good to hear your voice. Joshua Kane, or Kane Joshua Kane.
Hi, yeah, it's Josh. I'm with the LA Daily News. My question was about the safety management system, the sort of oversight of that, and it sounded like Island Express was allowed to create its own safety management system, and obviously the other board member was asking about what those standards were for the company itself. And I guess I'm wondering, is it part of the recommendations? Is it your opinion that, is there any sort of overlapping federal system where FAA is looking at auditing, how helicopter companies are grading their own safety management systems? What are the rules that are in place now, and how is that monitored? And does that need to improve?
Yeah, and Josh, that's a good question. I think part of the problem is that the FAA currently does not require safety management systems for Part 135 operators, and that's what we feel needs to change. So without a requirement, the FAA wouldn't have any ability to come in and say whether or not a company's system was adequate or not. Follow up on that?
Yeah, my follow-up was just how long has that been a requirement, or has that been a recommendation that the NTSB has been pursuing for a while? And what is taking the FAA so long? Is it just presumably there'd have to be a new auditing system that they have to create, right? Is that part of the intransigence on this? Why is it taking so long?
Well, your question is a great question, and we asked the same thing, and we have reiterated our first safety recommendation for Part 135 operators. And of course, as you know, Part 135, that means charter. So we issued our first recommendation for charter operations to have SMS in November of 2016. In the past 4 years, we have reiterated that safety recommendations 4 times. And I want to point out that we issue and reiterate safety recommendations when there's blood on the ground. We don't just come up with these recommendations because, oh gosh, that would be a really good idea. We issue these recommendations when bad things happen. And the FAA has dragged their feet so many times on this issue and others. And we hope that we will finally get their attention. Okay, we'll go to some guy named Alan Levin. Hello, Alan.
Hi, Robert.
And-
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you pretty well.
Chairman,
Not great.
I should say.
Yeah, that's all right.
I apologize. I've had some computer issues and missed the beginning. So if I'm repeating myself, forgive me, or I'm repeating questions you've already received. But I wondered if you could speak to, just in general terms, how this accident could have been prevented, and what are the kind of key things that you would like to see the industry adopt across the board to help reduce these accidents?
There are several things that could have prevented this accident, and one of which is what I brought up in the board meeting. If this was an IFR certified Part 135 operator with a current pilot that was current on his instrument skills and legal, this flight could have taken off, entered the clouds, flown in the clouds, or actually in this case above the clouds. The tops were not that high. They went up to about 2,500 feet. So he could have flown up and then been in the clear blue Southern California sky that you grew up in, Alan, and the marine layer would be below him. And then he could have conducted an instrument approach at Camarillo, although the weather was good enough at Camarillo that he wouldn't have even had to do an instrument approach. So I think that that's one way it could have been prevented. Another way it could have been prevented would have been if the pilot would have, when things started going sour in terms of the visibility not looking great, made the decision right then and there to land somewhere and not continue to press on, whether that's turning around 12 miles behind him and going back to Van Nuys, or whether it's finding a shopping center parking lot or whatever it happens to be. But that's another way that could have prevented this accident. Moving forward, we feel the training for, maybe that was Bill English that was going to speak up, but moving forward, we do feel that training for scenario-based training would help pilots to have cue-based training, to where you say you actually are flying a simulator or a flight training device and you can see that the weather is deteriorating. Now, what am I going to do? So that's my answer on that.
Thank you
We'll
very
take
much.
more questions. We'll take a few more questions.
Thank you, Keith. I see that we've got about 1, 2, 3, 4. So if it's all right with you, Keith, we'll just plow through those. How does that sound? Okay, great. Thank you, Keith. Nick, New York Times. Nick, hello.
Hi, Chairman. Thank you so much for taking the question and for everyone for doing this. Just a quick question, either for you or Mr. English. You've talked a lot about, obviously, the disorientation of the pilot being disoriented. Is it possible that the occupants of the helicopter didn't know at any point that they were ever falling?
I do not know the answer to that, so thank you for asking. And the helicopter was descending at a rate of at least 4,000 feet a minute. I can tell you that much. But what they were actually feeling, I do not know. Anything else on that, Nick?
No, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Laura Diaz. Laura, do you have another question, Laura Diaz? All right, we'll go to David Koenig.
No, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. David, your hand's up. David Koenig.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have also a question about spatial disorientation. It was noted in the hearing how often this has been a factor in crashes. Has there been, just for the history of it, has there been any progress in reducing that danger in recent years? And secondly, what kind of a reduction might you see if the board's recommendations today are put into effect?
Yeah, I will say that the helicopter accident rate, and I've got a chart around here somewhere, and I don't know where it is at this point, but the helicopter accident rate did decrease a good bit between 2004 and about, let me see if I can find that chart. I got that chart from the U.S. helicopter team, U.S. HST, U.S. helicopter safety team. And the accident rate did come down a good bit. It's plateaued. It is right here. I know you can't see this very well, but it does show a decreasing trend. So from 2004, they had a fatal accident rate of about 1.44 fatal accidents per 100,000 flight hours. By 2009, they had reduced that to below 0.1, below 1.0. So it was down to 0.08. From there, it's kind of plateaued. It's down to about 0.69, 0.7 now, but they're at that point where getting that incremental improvement is difficult. So overall, helicopter safety rate, accident rate has come down. That's a good thing, but it's plateaued and not coming down more. I think spatial disorientation will continue to be a problem until we can, excuse me, get the training that we've recommended. As you know, we came out with a recommendation for the FAA to convene a multidisciplinary panel of aircraft performance, human factors, and operations specialists to evaluate spatial disorientation simulator technologies to see how we can improve that training capability. Anything else before we move on?
No, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Stephanie? Nope. Okay.
Thanks. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
So just to confirm, the Zobayan had he could have flown IFR, correct? He was certified for that. And do pilots who have the certification for IFR not usually go instruments only? Can you talk a little bit about why or why not?
Yeah, he was an instrument rated pilot, but the company itself was not certified, was not legal. Island Express did not have the credentials that they needed to be an IFR operation. To do that, you have to jump through more hoops, more training hoops. Your aircraft have to be meet certain standards. So he himself was an instrument rated pilot. Whether or not he was current, you have to meet certain currency requirements to be legal for it. But irrespective of all that, his company, he would have been illegal by going into the clouds. Did that answer your question there?
Yes, but that did, thank you. But in a broader sense, do you find that pilots are reluctant to go instrument only, or the fact that maybe they're certified with this higher rating, but the companies are not because it requires, as you said, more things to jump through?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting tired, and I hope I understand your question right. So I think his reluctance. Well, I can't speak to what his reluctance would necessarily be, but if your company is not legal for IFR flying and you go into the clouds, then you're subjecting yourself to be violated by the FAA. And if you're not proficient in instrument flying, you are very much in danger of killing yourself, which is what happened in this case, because he was not apparently instrument proficient. Once he went into the clouds and no longer had the visual references, he became spatially disoriented.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I hope that answered your question. Josh, back to you, and we're getting to the end. We'll go to Nancy after that, and that'll be the last question. So Josh, what's your follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think we're all kind of hammering on that point that you're making. So just to be clear, when we're talking about the federal rules that the pilot violated, you're talking about the fact that his company was not rated for IFR, correct? So by going to the clouds, he violated those federal rules, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. But on a personal level for him, it would just be a matter of maintaining his proficiency in instrument rated flying, correct?
Are you asking that if he was not flying for a charter operator that that did not have IFR certification, are you asking? I'm sorry. I'm tired at this point. So.
No, I think, yeah, it's been, I guess the question is, so he would have to have stayed current with his certifications, right, to fly instruments. That would also be part, but the investigators just don't have that information, correct?
The investigators don't have what? I just missed that next to the last word. We don't have what?
They don't have that information, whether his current certification was in terms of flying instrument rated, correct?
That's I think that's right. Bill English, do you know anything about that? I think it's kind of irrelevant because he wasn't supposed to go in the clouds in the first place. Bill, did you want to tag on to that?
Correct. The chairman just made the point. The pilot, regardless of his certification, was not on an IFR clearance, was not on an instrument clearance. Was not allowed to go in the clouds to begin with. We do not believe this pilot was instrument current. The last training event that we can see for him was in May of 2019. That would be too far before the accident, so was not current. So and we don't do violations, but there were a number of issues going on. As the chairman explained already, the company was not allowed to carry passengers under instrument flight rules. The pilot, because he's working for the company, can't do it. And he did not have the currency in order to do that, nor did he have air traffic control clearance to do so. There we go.
Great point, Bill. Thank you for that. And furthermore, I would say there's the issue of currency and proficiency. Currency is a legal requirement that you have to have, and I don't even remember what the currency requirements are these days, but you have to have a certain amount of instrument time and maybe a certain amount of instrument approaches within the past 6 months or whatever it happens to be. But the proficiency issue, and I'm going to say that he was not proficient in his instrument flying, because if he was, he would not have, more than likely, he would have maintained control of the helicopter. Before, he would have been relying on his flight instruments, flying the helicopter, and therefore could have overpowered the spatial disorientation. We find that people, if you're real dizzy, if you have your eyes closed and you spin on a merry-go-round, when you open your eyes and you see the horizon, you quit being dizzy. And the same thing here. If pilots are trained, instrument pilots are trained to trust their flight instruments and resist all of those spatial disorientating factors. So I would say he was not proficient, in addition to current nor legal, because the company wasn't legal, nor, as Bill pointed out, did he have an air traffic control clearance. Long answer. Sorry about that.
No,
Nancy,
I appreciate it. Thank you both.
Yes.
Yeah, that clears things up for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. You're last. Oh, Nancy Dillon, you're on mute if you're trying to ask a question. Okay. All right. So I don't think she wants to ask a question. So Keith, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, this concludes our NTSB media availability for today. Thank you for participating. A recording of the availability will be available on NTSB's YouTube channel as soon as practicable. Follow-up questions may be directed to NTSB Media Relations at ntsb.gov or 202-314-6100. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Sorry if it was kind of messy there, but it's hard to do a press conference speaking into a tube here that people keep popping up. But thank you very much. I appreciate your covering it. Keith, thank you. Bill, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Mr.
Bye-bye.
Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you.